actually be talking about next generation product and AI services. So from LSP to next generation product and AI service provider, conversation with founders, being led by Konstantin Dranch, who is a market researcher in our industry. He's been making the localization space more transparent by developing vendor and technology reports, comparison tools, and maps. One of his most recent project is Custom MT, where he's training machine translation engines with specific language data. And I will leave it to him to introduce the panel of that will be talking about this topic. So Konstantin, the floor.
Thank you, Søren.
Wait, I probably a lot of people came from the session before. Just the quick reminder about chat and Q&A. So if you're just joining right now, there's some ground rules, and I think they were I hope they're getting reposted. There's some ground rules, but I don't want to keep you too long with that. So no video, no audio for anybody else who's not on the panel, including me, after this brief technical and housekeeping reminder. Okay, Konstantin, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to see you. We have more than 100 people in the room. I hope you're happy to see us. Let's talk about your next $1 million, or maybe your next $10 million. We'll see today. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you the panelists today. I see already Christoph joining up. Christoph, maybe you can say 1 minute introduction for your company. What's your story with data services? And we'll do a round robin.
Yes, hi, hello everyone. Thanks, Konstantin, for having me on the panel. My name is Chris. I come from Poland, and I founded an LSP a few years back. And why am I here on this panel? I think my story is relevant to the conversation we're going to have, is because it's relevant because I have transformed my company from a traditional LSP to a business that is now deriving most of its revenue from forms of AI data services. So I'll be talking about this over the back and forth we're going to have over this panel. Excited to be here, and back to you.
Chris, I remember in the preparation meeting, we discussed that out of your $25 million, 60% is now data.
Yeah, I think one relevant
Something
question
like
we have to answer, and maybe that's a good starter, is what we mean by data, because I've heard multiple definitions of what data services or
right.
data
We'll go into
so,
detail. Let's get into detail later.
I would say this, translation services are about 20% of our revenue. The data, the rest is one or the other form of data management, data collection, data annotation, or multilingual data management, as we say. But yeah, happy to deep dive later.
Excellent. I see Jane opened up her camera. Jane, would you like to do a quick introduction? I'm flabbergasted and surprised by your story, from 40 million to 200 million in 5 years. Give us a 1 minute introduction about this and what you do now.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, I've been in, maybe even defining data is one question, but defining our industry might be another one. Yeah, I've been in the localization and language industry for probably about 20 years. I started, like many people, as a translator, interpreter, a language lover. And prior to that, though, I had studied philosophy and different elements of kind of philosophy that always had me interested in cognition and thinking and the science of thinking and how language interplays with that. So as my experience in the localization industry went from sort of operations into other areas of the business, I really was thinking about our customers first and foremost, and how they were evolving, how we complemented and could help them. And I saw different opportunities over time, whether it was in translation services, different types of staffing, complementary services, and other related areas to localization. And eventually, of course, as AI started to become a burgeoning industry, even more than 10 years ago, I saw an opportunity to provide services that would be human in nature, that were required in order for those technologies to work, and that there was special approaches and different approaches to doing that that would be important for customers. So I'm based in California. It's kind of where I grew up, but I also spent a lot of my life in France and Czech Republic and Italy and different places. But yeah, so this is where I'm located. And currently I've been working on a number of different projects in actually other areas of AI. And I'm excited to be here with you and to discuss your topic.
Thank you, Jane. Corey, I see that you got this shiny new background from GALA Connected, and you're looking the best prepared person from our panel. Why don't you present how you rolled into data services? What's your story with the topic today?
Sure. So first of all, really nice to be here. Thanks for asking me to be on the panel. And I'm also really glad to see so many colleagues and new names of the participants that are taking part of GALA Connected. I'm on the board of GALA as well, as you know. We were really happy that you're here. Anyway, so we started Venga Global about 12, 13 years ago. And I came from the buying side. So I was not a linguist. I didn't translate. And I come more from kind of the money side. And very quickly, when I started Venga, I realized that I didn't actually know translation and any of that. But what I did know was the high-tech industry. That's where I came from. So within the company, we have hired people and we have a lot of technology. It's always been a focus of ours. And in 2014, when we got our first NLP data project, I think part of the reason why we said, yeah, this sounds like a good idea is because we were used to technology. And I think when we also got started, very quickly we realized that all the stuff that we knew how to do in traditional localization and translation was kind of out of the window. And if you didn't do that, then you would be using old processes, old technology that wouldn't really get you anywhere. So after that, we've grown that side of business, and I think now we're about maybe 40% of our revenue comes from that non-defined NLP data.
Wow, that's very interesting. It's a really big figure, probably bigger than translations in your company, for it, or comparable.
Yeah, comparable. I always find that it's easier because I'm more of the money sort of person. I call it translation and not translation, and then so then it's roughly maybe 40–50%.
Excellent, Manuel. Last but not least. Tell us about your experience.
Okay, so I came to the localization industry by chance, really. I was an engineer. I worked in the 90s in the UK for the likes of Ford and Rolls-Royce. And because I spoke languages, I tended to be the link engineer on site when we were building plants or delivering engines. And then I moved to work for a Japanese corporation, BA Corporation, in 97, 98, for which I became the European director. And that was my first contact with the translation industry. I bought the company out in 2005, and then in 2007-08, we began a pattern recognition and statistical machine translation unit. That was quite a lot of fun, really. It was very high-tech, very new at the time, although the results were arguable. Okay, they were better than in some languages than the others. Then we linked up with Toshiba in Japan because of our Japanese roots. We had a 2-year spell doing R&D with them. And in 2017, we moved everything to Neural. So Pangeanic really is better known for the technology that has produced on the LSP side, although we do have that. And for some years, we had more translation services than technology. Of late, we've been awarded quite a few European projects for CEF, for building digital infrastructures for member states in the EU. With regard, for machine translation, data gathering efforts, and of late, anonymization and several other NLP areas like summarization or key data extraction. So from 2007 to now, we had a policy of amassing data that has created a very, very large stock of parallel data for training. We have over 10 billion aligned sentences in 86, 87 languages now to create or to adapt machine translation, but also to do many other things. Pattern detection.
I take it your European business of data services is exploding right now.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Although we began selling data in the US, and there was custom data, was made to order. So there were images in Arabic, let's say, and we had to find a hashtag, Black Lives Matter, that kind of thing, for OCR. Everybody's building chatbots, and everybody's building, even medium-sized companies are requesting training data because, let's face it, NLP PhDs were hard to come by 10 years ago. Every university is sending around 50, 60, 100 PhD, very qualified PhD students that know very well what they have to do. So they go and work for banks and so forth, which is very good, and they have some data. For them, typically that is not enough, and that's when you start selling.
And that is where the opportunity. Excellent. So thank you for the presentation, dear panelists. I will briefly introduce my vision of someone has to present what data services are, and then we'll run this quick poll of the audience, so please stand by for the poll. Quick sharing of the screen. So for those of us who don't know what data services are, here is one explanation. Doesn't have to be the most correct. I've taken examples from the industry, from the internet, and assembled in 2 slides. So here to the left, you see an article from Wikipedia where people manually are marking named entities inside the article so that the neural network can later detect those entities. And if you run 1,000 articles through that neural network, you will find easily dates, what the articles are talking about, what's happening, those kinds of things. So this is a text analysis tool. Bottom left, sentiment analysis. So in this case, humans are tagging opinions and saying whether it's a positive opinion or a negative opinion. Right here, it's Intercom is an easy to use tool, so positive marker, and has amazing features, another positive marker. So if you have 1 million reviews, you can run those reviews through a network and find out which reviews are positive and which reviews are negative. And then your agents can probably report, all right, we have 5 negative reviews, quickly jump on them, soothe the pain, connect the people writing the negative reviews to support agents so they like us again. Many other use cases. Maybe our sentiment is better than that of our competitor, so we are winning the market share, that kind of thing. To the right, you see computer vision. Now, in terms of money, one estimate, I'm quoting a little bit from the research of the past year, is that there's about $1.2 billion now generated by companies working in data connected to language. Right, because here you see the sentiment analysis that's in English, but then you need sentiment analysis in French, you need sentiment analysis in Spanish, you need sentiment analysis in Japanese, right? So all these engines need to be built, and that's a lot of work for linguists. And so one estimation doesn't have to be the most accurate, but a good point for us is 1.2 billion with a compound annual growth rate of almost 30%. Now, in this year's European language survey for smaller companies, as you can see on the panel, we have Corey, we have Manu, we have Chris, who all have 50, 40, 60% of their business now driven by data, and their companies are medium-sized, tens of millions of dollars. Small companies can also benefit. In the survey of small and medium companies in Europe, 7 out of 160 companies surveyed, they had some volume of business in data services. Maybe that was Corey, Manuel, and Chris participating, and maybe 3 people more. But obviously there are some movement over there. And one prediction, let me make a bold prediction here, is that this market is still going strong. It's still gaining traction, and it's going to explode. And many of us who are now doing translations and are complaining about this industry dying and becoming boring, they now see a new exit or a new way forward with data services. This is a shiny new thing that can transform our lives and give us purpose for the next 10 years, maybe. Let's have a look. Now, I've presented the topic. Hope you disagree with me on some points, because we have to disagree. Please run the poll. Let's see if the participants today are involved with data services as a buyer or seller. And while we are running the poll, Jane, the first question goes to you. We'll close it in a second, so you prepare. My question to you would be, most of the money previously in this data services came from large IT companies. You can name them. It's Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. Did I name them all? Maybe a little bit Baidu, maybe a little bit Yandex, I don't know. All these IT giants. And you moved Lionbridge AI from 40 to 200 million. Then it was sold last year in a surprising, amazing, huge deal, almost $1 billion in size, unimaginable numbers, bigger than SDL. I think, it's comparable with SDL, correct if I'm wrong. Now, right, is there more where this money comes from, right? Is there an opportunity for people who are here with us today to go out there and find more contracts, more business with these IT giants? Before you answer, we are displaying the poll results. 30% of our participants are diving a little bit in our area of data services. 20% say it's a large part of what they do. So we have half of the people who are already involved and half of the people who are not yet, with 22% who would like to, and 29% who are not planning to do this immediately, but maybe will change their minds today. So this is the end of my lengthy introduction, and I hope you had some fun. Now, Jane, the floor is yours. Please give us your take on the opportunity with Venga.
Yeah, so I mean, for data services, the main concept is to look at AI technology and which companies are building, developing AI tools, and maybe even going a little bit deeper and looking at the strategy that they're using within those technologies, because that will dictate how much data they need. And in order to produce, let's say a better tool, they may need more data, different types of data. They may need to diversify data. They may need to have a philosophy about data that changes over time. And that will, of course, impact suppliers who can work and provide services and offerings for AI companies. So the question is really, I think, whether, what we know commonly is like the largest AI tech, big tech type companies that, of course, they're very large. They have a lot of outsourcing capacity and infrastructure and all of these things, whether that trend will actually move towards less conventionally known AI companies. And so I think the argument that one could potentially make as to the opportunity would be, that every single institution that we know of in the market is impacted by AI. And so they will all need to, on some level, adopt such a technology and figure out their strategy as to whether they will own and develop their own AI tools, or whether they will license or utilize something from another company, right? So it's the same situation we've seen in lots of areas of technology. And I think, you know, what we know from the past won't necessarily be what will happen to the market in the future, but one sort of certitude is that the AI trend is not receding. It's actually accelerating greatly. And I think the important part again there is not just sort of using the term AI, but actually understanding, you know, the underlying technology of different customers, understanding the approach they're using, and if they are using approaches that are data heavy or that require a heavy amount of data that does not exist or does not exist sufficiently within their own organization, they're absolutely going to be looking for partners in the market to do that. And from the scale of just my own experience over the last, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years even, it's growing at a rate that's much bigger than what we would have seen maybe traditionally in the localization business.
So you're saying that the big companies still present the opportunity, but a bigger opportunity is all the other companies that haven't started building their AI yet. All the Volkswagens, all the corporate sector, the LexisNexis, the corporates who are not IT giants. This is where the juice is.
Yeah, and maybe not only that, you know, I don't know if I would say bigger opportunities, but in a sense, maybe bigger in the diversity of the customer base, in the varying approaches, and many of them are already and have been doing significant amounts of work in these areas, more than maybe people would assume. But for sure, you know, just as we see with the localization industry and the different approaches to, you know, selling and customer engagement and, you know, solution development and delivery and all of these, you know, kind of similar structures, you have almost, you know, I don't know, a much larger potential area that you could be servicing customers. So you can look at it in different ways and say, well, you know, maybe you'd have from one customer a very large, you know, amount of opportunity, but you may need 30 customers that would represent the same amount of revenue for your pipeline. So so the same principle would be there as well. And I think the potential is sort of to be determined depending on how things like cloud and other types of areas of AI develop for both the large AI companies and the smaller, maybe smaller, but not necessarily small companies, but companies that are not AI focused necessarily in their evolution, their own evolution. And you see that with car companies, the automotive sector, you know, all these different types of fields that are more inclined to do that and have more interest in their long-term product strategy to develop their own AI.
Cool. And before we switch to Manuel, your quick approximation, top of the head. the US, Europe, and Asia. What's the split between them in opportunity?
This for me?
Yes.
Sorry.
I put you on the spot a little bit.
Oh, I thought you were asking somebody else. Okay, sorry about that. What do I think the opportunity? That's probably a little tough to say because, you know, in addition to sort of what we think of, I guess, more conventionally as sort of the technology plays, for sure, you know, you'd see more opportunity in the United States. But as far as data strategy, as it concerns European countries and governments, and you know, these types of things, there's already a much different data philosophy, and therefore probably I would say there's more opportunity than we understand or think about even to now that will exist in the future. So it's I think that's really tough to say. I would say it's probably, you know, closer to you know, 80% in the US and then maybe splitting the rest up between, you know, Europe and Asia, but that's probably, you know, going to be changing, you know, and even in the next few years we're going to see quite a bit of change there, and I think we already have in the last 2 years. So
just 80% US. Manuel, would you challenge this? Would you say no, Europe is bigger? Let's let's defend Europe in the AI struggles.
You asking me?
Yes, tell us about the European opportunity. Many of us here are from Europe, and you are in the juice, in the know of the European data services sector. Can you share us with us some secrets of how big is it? Is it growing? Where is the next 100 million to be made?
The trend really started in the US, and I'd say that took place 4 years ago. That's when data services started to become popular. There's no question about it. Since then, and obviously driven by the big 4 or 5 companies that we all hear about, building the Google Translates and Bing Translates and so forth, and Alexas and Siris. After that, there is a noticeable trend changing in Europe, because more developers are jumping on the data wagon. Okay, it's not as big as the US, but it's happening, and I can only see it growing. My tip really for LSPs all over the world would be not to focus too much on Europe or the United States, but to look at local companies that are developing chatbots and NLP and AI services locally, which they all are. I mean, this was really rocket science 4 years ago. It's not really rocket science nowadays. You know, NLP scientists and data scientists abound everywhere, really, from Portugal to Turkey and from Sweden to Morocco. So really, it's about having a conversation with local companies. I think the data market is going to become more local in the coming years.
Yes, but the United States product owners working inside Google's and Facebook's of the world, they wield the budgets of hundreds of millions, right? 80%, as Jane has thankfully estimated for us. The European data buyer is probably government, which still has the millions, but not hundreds of millions, maybe 5s, 10s of millions. And then there is this data scientist who is building a chatbot in your friendly neighborhood small business, which don't have the millions, they have a few thousands maybe. The question is, where is the real money?
Okay, yes, everybody wanted to work for Google and Microsoft 10 years ago. But really, it's a very good example, Konstantin, because everybody has local clients. Doing translations for a company X, Y, or Z in the town next door. Well, the same's happening now with data. Everybody wanted to work for Google and Facebook. Facebook doesn't buy any data, by the way, or very little, because they mine it. They take it from their users. But okay, we all have 5 or 6 companies in mind, and everybody wants to work for them. But it's the same that happened with localization. Okay? You had very large buyers in the US or China or Japan, and then medium-sized and smaller. What I'm saying is that there is a market. Okay, it could be boutique, it could be niche next to you, but that market didn't exist 5 years ago. So what is bigger, the long tail or the short tail?
But I also think you could build a very successful translation company with smaller clients, or you can go for the really big clients. I think it's you're getting there, but I definitely agree with Jane that for the last few years, I would also go with 80% coming from the US. But I think one comment I wanted to make was that inside of these big 5, and I think I know at least some of you have been involved in some companies that we're involved with, but there are many different departments, and they haven't, it doesn't seem like they've got to the same stage with centralization. So you could be selling to almost, obviously not the same product, but within a large company, you could be selling to one, and your competitor over here is selling to a different group, and that's fine. And they all have millions to spend. But I think also with the big companies, problem is that you can get lots of millions, and then suddenly, no, actually, no, we changed our mind. We're going to do something different, and then nothing. So you know, you have to take that into account. One final thing, and then I'll stop. One thing that I think we're missing here is also there are actually a lot of small data scientist-led companies, and plenty of them in Europe, like 1, 5, maybe 10 people, but many of them just 1 or 2 people that have nice little contracts of $1 million, 2, 3, 4 from some of these big companies. So it's not just that language companies are coming in, there are also data scientist companies solving kind of the NLP side of the issue. So it's a very interesting and Wild West, if you want, sort of environment at the moment.
Whereas there's a Wild West, there's also Klondike, right? And there's gold to be mined. Krzysztof, how do you mine gold? Tell us about the transformation. LSP, which does translations, is not the same as an LSP, which does data. What are the steps that this baby has to go through? What are the growth pains? What's the difference between the production model in one and the other? Well, your story.
So I think there's maybe just to take a step back and answer a question of what we mean by data, because I think that's also very, very fundamentally very important. So Jane has spoken about data collection, data annotation for the purposes of AI, training AI. So that's in the form of text, like Manuel has discussed, and we do a lot of voice as well for the Series and Bixby's, also to quote Manuel. So that's important and a large part of data collection and annotation. But there are also other forms of data management. A lot of LSPs, and that probably answers your question as well, as claim to be doing a lot of data work, and what they actually do is they hire people, staff people at clients' locations maybe, or remotely, that sit and annotate or perform different linguistic tasks on client platforms. So I call it maybe a managed service, but or a staffing exercise rather than a proper data management or a data service. But that's also a form of what we mean by data management in our industry. And there are also very interesting data applications on the in the translation localization space. You can think, if you really think about it, and stop calling, well, the long story short is we as LSPs process a lot of content, and that content is not only the words that we process from one language to another language, but also there's a lot of interesting and important data points that we process as we do perform the service of translations. And the moment that an LSP can think of maybe making use of these data points, or actually talking to the customer and saying, look, while we translate, maybe we can offer something more than just translating. Maybe we can provide some insights into the data which we anyways analyze, anyways work on. That becomes very interesting. So these are the three forms of data services that I see in the industry. And now I think the language industry is somehow similar and somehow very different. And it's important to spot these differences and also realize the similarities. So first of all, as LSPs, we have the ability to manage crowd, right? We work with freelancers, and that's also, at least in the data collection business, something that is a must in a sense, right? Because data annotate or data collection, data services is a combination of technology and crowd and people. We're the human in the loop, right? We collect data in a sense. So managing crowd micropayments, a lot of payments, the dispersed crowd around the world is a similarity. But technology is very different, right? So that second leg is very different. We don't use CAT tools and TMSs in the data space. We have data annotation tools and mobile, crowdsourcing, data collection apps and the like. So if you're trying to apply a traditional, LSP, let's say, tech stack over to a data world, that would not necessarily work well.
So what are you using instead of a TMS? Do you have
no, I mean the TMS is in a sense your backbone for managing your translation work, but that's not relevant for the data world, right? For the data world, it's a crowd collection, in a sense. A crowd collected tool is required. So a mobile app that hundreds and tens of thousands of people can download and start recording, from conversations, start taking pictures, or performing, different micro tasks. That's an important piece of your tech stack, right? And also the back or a web-based platform where you can annotate stuff and label stuff. You've showed us your opening slide. You've showed a print screen from the Lionbridge website where the dots were connected around objects. So that kind of technology, right? LSPs don't own that kind of stuff. So that's certainly a difference, right? Between
What did you go with? Did you build any tools, or did you use
the tools
from the buyer?
We have experimented with data services similar to what Kara was saying. We had clients that approached us to perform these tasks we didn't know much about, and then we saw this is very interesting, and started experimenting with just a simple, like hiring people that would provide these tasks and perform these tasks on client platforms mainly. And then the moment we realized this is where actually we see our future, we've actually went and purchased a company. We bought a company in North America, and that was a purely a data collection, data company.
And this Global Me, if I remember correctly,
yes, right? That's correct. Global
and they had the tools.
They had all the tools, and we built on top of them. Yeah.
Any other steps that you took to build up your production facilities? So one is, of course, to have the tools from somewhere, and this market is underdeveloped. What else, 2 or 3 steps that entrepreneur like you or me needs to take to make sure they have a strong production? Yeah,
I think it's we are kind of sacrifice the synergies between the translation business and the data business, and we actually keep these businesses really separate in a sense. And our focus is data management, multilingual data management. And there's probably ways of maybe trying to look for some synergies between translation and the rest, but we think it's just better to not to mix the two, because there are a lot of traditional linguistic or language industry thinking patterns that we could potentially apply, but when you think about them, they don't really work that well. I'll give you one example. Of maybe to emphasize the point. Like one of the tasks or one of the workflows that we have is in the translation business is the validation of the quality of content, not by a translator or a linguist, but by a target audience member, right? So this is where we apply, where we use our crowdsourcing tool, and we would send passages from empty output to the target buyers of our customers, and we would ask them questions, right? And the natural answer, and so we're brainstorming internally on what kind of questions we should ask, right? And all the translation project managers would say, okay, do you see, they would ask questions like, do you see a grammatical mistake, or, is there something wrong with, how, and no, these are not the kind of questions we want to ask, right? We're trying to find an answer to a question. How likely are you to actually purchase a product on basis of, 5 samples that you can see? So the real questions that you need to answer are like, is there something wrong with that sentence, right? Are you encouraged to read further? Is there anything that, so that's the difference. That's the fundamental difference. And it's difficult to transform the language mind, which I also come from, right? Into a data mind. But I think so that's a difficulty or a hassle that we're kind of struggling with.
Interesting. Let's compare experiences. Kore,
actually,
did you go through the same? Yes.
Yeah, similar. I agree with a lot of what you said, Christoph. We also built our own tools. At one point in one project, the idea was to use the cat tool that we had for 15 minutes. But just the thought of having 1,000 people download and try to, it was just a nightmare. So we built our own tools. I disagree perhaps a little bit on the vendor management and crowd and all that. Quite a lot of these people we want to work with once, and we want them to do this, and then we might never see them again. So that changes kind of the traditional vendor management role into more of a recruitment, if you want. The tooling and the solutions that you have, you need to have clever people that can work with that. But another aspect that I think is important as well, especially for medium-sized companies, is cash flow. So let's say you get a $4 million project, and it could be 40 million or it could be 400,000. You can do it any way you like. And let's say you have a 25% margin. That means that you would basically carry 3 million for however long, let's say 4 months or 5 months, depending on how long the project is and their payment terms. But you have to pay all your people, the 75%. You have to pay all of that when you're running the project. So you have to be careful with that as well, because some of these projects can be pretty large for a company like ourselves. And then I think you get to the payment processing as well. How do you pay people? And there are smart solutions out there, so you can solve that, but it's something to be aware of. If you're based in the US and you go down to the local high street bank and you pay $45 for a bank transfer, well, you've already lost all the money that you were going to make on the project anyway. So these are just some stuff that are important to remember from running it from a business point of view.
Yeah, I fully agree. Probably one thing I would add is the crowd itself, because as LSPs we have a lot of translators and reviewers and people of that sort in our in the database. But it's translators are not really the best people to ask for going around streets and clicking pictures, or recording short voice utterances. They get offended. So we also made that mistake, and they're also not into $2 an utterances kind of a job, right? Yeah. And so that's a clear difference between the two.
Yeah, it's a transformation. You're right, Christoph. It's a transformation from being a language translation vendor to a staffing company managing micropayments, yes, and having to send 20 euros payment to Pakistan or India or Morocco.
Yeah, I was going to add, sort of along the lines of what you guys are mentioning, there are distinct differences between a translation business and others. I mean, even within translation, there's quite a bit of variety that's grown over the last, decade or so. You can have many different tools and all of these things, but that's sort of secondary to the core function of what you're doing. And so when in the data business, you have to think a lot more broadly as far as what you're doing. Language may be a very important component of how you vet or enable the delivery of something, but it also might not be. And to the extent that the scale of data and the means of procuring that data or curating it or annotating it or whatever the case may be, there's a much broader sort of logistical component to the whole delivery than a traditional translation company might have. And so that requires some innovative thinking as far as how you're going to solve to the particular machine learning solution versus how you're solving and trying to get a process in place for something that may not really need a process that's beyond solving a certain problem that's temporary, or that's a one-off or something like that. So there's every aspect of the business kind of has a different pace, a different scale, a different resourcing, a different payments, a different solutioning type of approach to it that is much, that can have a lot more variety to it than we sort of traditionally see in the translation business, which is both a good and bad thing. It can be risky, I think, as you were mentioning. You might have a cash flow problem. You might have other considerations, like actually the form of your operational model can matter as much as the data itself. Are you doing this in a particular country? Are you not doing it? Is that relevant to some legal questions, some employment questions, some particular payment type considerations? All those things are almost, if not as important as the data itself that gets acquired. And so I think just as far as, the way localization companies should think about like getting into this space, or how they would be maneuvering in this space. To some extent, you know, as Chris is mentioning, you have to think a lot differently, and that's not always easy. It's not always easy because you're stretching every part of your organization in different directions it's not accustomed to. So any kind of change within, you know, a vendor's model can be challenging. But there in particular are considerations in the logistical and operational thinking that's different. And I think that's what you guys are all touching on, which I would just say that it definitely is, and it's definitely an important aspect to the business.
Awesome. Let's we have about 13 minutes left. I have one last question to proceed with as our narrative flows, and then we'll open up to the floor. The question is, it's a little bit different. Everyone agrees, right? It's not the same business. You can transition, you need to make changes. The important part is, how do you win the business? How do you compete? On one side, you have Lionbridge, you have WeLocalize, you have Pactera with big portfolios. These are industry insider kind of sharks who are very adept at winning those contracts, and they've built an offering which is years ahead. They've been, like Jade, you've been doing this for 5 years, right? The offering of Lionbridge by now is very advanced. On the other hand, you have industry outsiders. Labeling companies are a legion. You have Mechanical Turk from Amazon. You have Clockworker. You have Toloka from Yandex. You have many others. They are getting acquired. They're getting funding. Today with us, I know we have Alessandro from Define Crowd. He's probably listening with interest to what you're saying. So, and you entrant to this market is beset by industry sharks on one side and by outsiders from the industry with even a stronger probably offering, IT kind of offering. In this situation, how do you make yourself attractive? How do you win business? How do you compete? Corey, this is your topic. Let's start with you and maybe get
yeah, no, I'm happy to have everyone kind of take part of this, but one thing that we found is that what happened 2 or 3 years ago doesn't happen anymore. So there's no point in building up kind of, this is the way we're going to do these projects forever. So it keeps changing, which means that you're kind of resetting almost all the time. So that gives you an opportunity to go in and compete with some of the other companies. We've also noticed lately, and I'd be interested to hear what the rest of you think, is that it seemed like a few years ago, you needed big sizes, like the bigger the better. And it seems to be that you were basically trying to determine if the engine was good or bad. And if it was bad, then you do another load of data. But it seems like over time, and what we're hearing back from our clients, and we work with, I think, 4 of the big 5, is that we go to you because we get higher quality. So it seems like if you have a really big crowd without any real selection, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but if you then produce information or data that comes back that isn't of enough quality, then it is of no use to them to train the engines. So it seems like we got to a point where they need higher quality. And that's actually where I think if you're open-minded and you're willing to build your tools and all the stuff that we've all been talking about, that's where I think we can come in and come up with really interesting and innovative solutions that they are willing to pay for and willing to try, because they feel that that would give, they'll get more out of that than the big, not as high quality data sets.
Who'd like to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. I mean, I think probably, you know, quality always ends up being, you know, maybe the first kind of thing that comes up, because the better the quality of the data, the more sort of transparently and quickly you see that in the effect that it has on the tool, you know. So that's a really, really important part. But there's other ways in which to even think about quality that don't have to do necessarily with language or with sort of the traditionally understood linguistic considerations. It may even in a much higher sense than what we even do in a translation kind of context, but it has so much variety to it that even defining quality on a project by project basis becomes a very important aspect. So smaller players who become very good at, let's say, at one particular type of activity could have as much of a competitive advantage as a much larger player that has more infrastructure in some other area. So I definitely think that that's the case. And I would also say speed. You know, I think smaller companies have a certain agility to them and a focus that they can give depending on what the activity is that may be involved. But you know, they may have limitations as well because of infrastructure, things along those lines. But I would say, you know, it's a much more Wild West, to use the term that was something I used to say 6 years ago when I started, but it's still remains that way because of the inherent nature of AI, that it's constantly changing and evolving and all of this stuff. So it's helpful to get experience, of course, and all of those things are important. But it also creates a different dynamic for companies to be able to find what they're good at and to address the question of quality and speed with which they can do the work. And I think companies value that incredibly. So, you know, the ability to kind of define what that quality means and to do all of those things very quickly in order to get them what they need to achieve their goals with their AI tool.
Christoph, I see you've opened the microphone. Would you like to contribute, or we move on
I
to the floor?
think I just had my mic open for the...
Okay.
I forgot to unmute myself.
No, that's good. Then we move to the questions from the floor. We have a couple of questions and 6 minutes remaining. Is that all right with everyone?
Absolutely.
I see notes. Excellent. So thank you for the main dish. Now comes the digestive. The first question I'd like to address is the question from Diego Criseri from Creative Words, a fellow professional and a company in data services, LSP, which is very advanced in this transformation. Diego says he has worked with similar projects for LSPs, looks like a subcontractor, and the main challenge was recruiting people and onboarding them to systems and paying them. Any tips? Manuel, let's start with you. You've been silent for about 5 minutes. Time to get back to the floor.
Which is strange. Yeah. Well, this question relates directly to what I mentioned before. It is a transformation of the translation company, the LSP, into staffing or crowdsourcing company, whatever you want to call it. Okay, in our case, it's different because we have been gathering data from our statistical machine translation days 10 years ago. So we have stock data that people know it works because it comes from a developer, from a technology developer. But when we have orders from other companies to create data, specific data for AI training, yes, the challenge really is not just the vendors outside, but also the staff, the people that have been translating German, Spanish, or French for a long time, have to change their mindsets and become data managers or proofreaders or quality managers on the one side. And then there's undoubtedly an admin challenge, which is how to pay not your 10 people in France or in Egypt or in Vietnam, but how do you pay 500 people in 35 countries? It is a challenge. It's not easily solved, but luckily enough, fintech is a sector that is very innovative, and there are several solutions. Much better. The situation is much better than it was 4 years ago. There are a number of ways to send electronic payments, micropayments to, there is Stripe, there's ChargeBee, there's
Revolut and so on. But what about recruitment? I think Corey wanted to add.
Well, I was going to say, Jane mentioned that earlier, that there's many aspects of this, and one of them is like you have to have an audit trail. Otherwise, I could decide to take money out of the company and I can pay myself in lots of different accounts and then put it together. So you need to have an audit trail, you need to have a mechanism. We built our own tool to manage that. And then we use, not one of the ones you mentioned, but a different one, but you know, there are many of them. But I also wanted to just say that one time we paid with vouchers to a food court. So they had like, I don't know, 15 different restaurants and they got X amount. That was the cheapest way for us to get all these people to do what we wanted them to do. So you need to, like we've all said, you need to think outside the box.
Yeah, we frequently pay with Amazon vouchers. That's one of the main forms of our data payment or payment for data.
Which prompts my next question. You will make millions in data services in the next 5 years. It will all make you rich. It will make all of you rich. The companies that implement AI successfully, thanks to your efforts, will make billions. But what about the people who do the work? What about the resources? Is there any hope for them?
They get a free lunch.
They get a free lunch. All right, this is a very good. That's a very good statement to wrap it up. Anyway, we have one last minute left.
I think that's also, especially in Asian countries, Konstantin, I wouldn't make fun of it. I think it's a great way of, you know, supplementing your daily income. I mean, you live in countries like India, $20 a day is a lot of money, right? And we pay $20 an hour for recording Hindi conversations over phone. So I think that's also an important part of their daily or monthly
and
income.
you're going somewhere anyway and you're using your phone, and it's raining outside and that was the requirement, so you do your recording, you make a little bit of extra money.
Right. What's a free lunch in San Francisco is a living for the whole family in Bangladesh. Let's wrap up. I see Soren has popped up to say our time is over. The questions have poured in like rain. And I encourage you to join the next networking session to answer them, because I think we've struck the most interesting conversation in this upcoming conference. I wish you great networking, and I'm really grateful to the panelists today who have honestly expressed their opinions and shared valuable insights into the business. The conference is just beginning, so let's get to it. Thank you very much.